Well, well, well. Look who finally made it. It's about time you showed up. Astro Bot is a huge celebration of PlayStation history, so much so that a few months ago I released a series of videos about the origins of every single VIP bot. However, throughout these videos I kept making jokes about a noticeable exclusion from the crew. One notable publisher whose characters were entirely absent from the game, despite their prominent presence on PlayStation. That publisher was Square Enix, who refused access to their characters when the game was initially in development. However, considering how many other publishers happily said yes to basically everything, it seems that this left Square Enix as the odd ones out, the sole party pooper not willing to play along. And now, seemingly embarrassed by this, a new update to Astro Bot finally brought some of their more notable characters to the game. Better late than never, I guess. And so, here is a bonus addendum video to the main series, covering these new additions. Same rules apply as the main series, characters appear in order of their first PlayStation appearance, I do accept corrections but do check if it's been covered already, and all the music used here is in a playlist I have linked in the description. Mixed in with the main games, of course. And with that, let's take a look at all the Square Enix characters that just got added, plus the one extra Sony character that was added to promote a future game. And where better to start than the big one. In 1983, Masafumi Miyamoto founded the company Square as a software development subsidiary of his father's electric company. They had a run of a few unsuccessful years developing games such as The Death Trap, Thexter, and King's Knight, all of which failed to sell many copies. However, after the success of Dragon Quest in Japan, one of Square's university hires, Hironobu Sakaguchi, pitched an RPG, heavily inspired by games such as Ultima and The Legend of Zelda. Originally titled Fighting Fantasy, the new game would be forced to change its name to avoid trademark issues with a series of British gamebooks of the same name. Since Sakaguchi felt like this would be his last chance to have a major hit, he changed Fighting to Final, and the game would release for the Nintendo Famicom in 1987. Based around a group of warriors who set out to save a princess, Final Fantasy would prove to be a huge hit. Square knew this had to be a franchise, and it would quickly become their flagship. However, since the first game's story was so self-contained, a direct sequel would prove difficult. Instead, the series became an anthology, where each entry took place in a new world with new characters telling its own story, where only themes and certain recurring elements would be carried over across each entry. Final Fantasy II and III continued the series on the Famicom, before moving over to the Super Famicom for 4 to 6. Here, the stories would get more complex, and gameplay systems would be expanded in interesting ways. Despite the series' popularity in Japan, only 3 of these 6 games would see a release in North America, with the first game being released for the NES, and 4 and 6 being rebranded as 2 and 3 for the SNES. These last 2 especially gained a lot of attention for their deep storylines, expansive combat systems, and that one bit where a guy suplexes a train. With the arrival of 3D technology to the games industry in the mid-90s, Square decided that the 7th entry in the series would take advantage of this. After years working with Nintendo, it became obvious that their new 3D console, the N64, wasn't powerful enough to realise their vision. Instead, Square moved to Nintendo's new upstart rival in the console market, Sony, and shifted a lot of their development to the PlayStation. Not only was the system better suited for Square's ambitions, Sony were also willing to handle publishing duties in Europe, bringing the series to an even wider audience. Work on Final Fantasy VII began in 1995, where systems from Final Fantasy VI were tweaked and expanded. With the new tech, battles were developed with more cinematic presentation in mind. It was ambitious, with around 100 people working on the game on a budget of around $40 million, one of the most expensive games at the time of its development. Final Fantasy VII focuses on a group named Avalanche, who are fighting back against a mega-corporation named Shinra. The company provides a comfortable, high-tech lifestyle for the people of the vast city of Midgar, but at a huge environmental cost due to an energy named Mako being sucked out of the Earth. We join our heroes on a mission to destroy one of the company's reactors, led by a loud man named Barrett, accompanied by a cocky mercenary for hire named Cloud. What follows is a complex political tale about environmentalism, corporate greed, and super soldiers with mommy issues. Gameplay was turn-based, using the active time battle system from Final Fantasy VI, where turns would activate as a bar is filled, unlike other more traditional turn-based systems. Party members could equip materia, orbs of glowing magical energy, to unlock new skills and boost their stats. You primarily play as Cloud, who goes from only working with Avalanche for a single job, to travelling the world with a ragtag party on the trail of a mysterious man in black who threatens the planet. Final Fantasy VII was massive. A juggernaut of the PS1 era, this was a game that helped sell the console and introduce the JRPG to a whole new group of people. And with that success and connection to the PS1, it was one of the cameos that people expected to see in Astro Bot. And while it took a while, eventually Cloud appeared as the Nibelheim mercenary. His name obviously references that he is a mercenary for hire, as I've described, hired by Avalanche at the start of the game. He advertises himself as a former member of Soldier, an elite branch of the military that only the best of the best are hired for, and these skills are what he claims make him a formidable force to have on your side. However, to one member of Avalanche, his childhood friend Tifa, he is the boy from Nibelheim. This quaint little town is also part of the world of Final Fantasy VII, and we get to see it in a flashback, and then in a worse state as part of the main story. Cloud wields the Buster Sword, a comically large sword that he can somehow lug around with little effort. This is his gacha item in Astro Bot, whose description references Cloud's surname, Strife. He can be seen holding the sword on his shoulder in the crash site, and occasionally swinging it around in a circle. This is a reference to his victory animation in battle. When hit, he will switch to a ready stance, which is his standard stance in battles. There is also a gauge that appears, and we need to talk about that. In Final Fantasy VII, there is a mechanic known as the limit break. Every character in your party has a gauge that gradually fills whenever they take damage. When this fills up completely, that character can unleash a powerful move that does a ton of damage and sometimes has additional effects. As the game progresses, characters can unlock new limit breaks by defeating a certain number of enemies or using their existing abilities a certain number of times. There are also special level 4 limit breaks, which are unlocked by reading manuals earned through high-level side quests. If Cloud is able to earn enough points at the optional Battle Square Combat Challenge, he can unlock his ultimate limit break, the Omnislash. This attack sees Cloud performing a series of rapid slashes on his enemy, before jumping up and slamming his sword down for one final blow. Limit breaks are referenced in Astro Bot in several ways. First, the gauge I mentioned is the limit bar. Second, it is mentioned in Cloud's description. That is why limit is capitalized. Third, if you hit Cloud enough, the gauge will fill and Cloud will unleash Omnislash on Astro, complete with a text box announcing the attack, just like in the original game. However, he will hold off on the final hit, resulting in a silly little bonk. However, let's go back to that bot description a second, because it isn't just the limit break system that's referenced here. Note that the word bravery is also capitalized. The closest thing I can find to this in the original Final Fantasy VII is Cloud's first limit break, which is called Braver. However, if we're looking for the full word, then there are two possible origins for this. In 2007, Square Enix released Dissidia Final Fantasy, which took the protagonists and main villains of the Final Fantasy series and threw them together into a 1v1 arena fighting game. The game featured two types of attack, one of which knocked off opponent HP, and the other was called a bravery attack. Bravery didn't do direct damage, but it did build up how much HP you could do with your other attacks. Since Cloud was a playable character in this game, it's possible that this is where the bravery reference comes from. However, in recent years, Square Enix have been releasing a trilogy of games meant to collectively act as a remake to Final Fantasy VII. The second of these, Rebirth, released in 2024, features an ability also called Bravery, which buffs physical damage and which Cloud can obtain in the game's first chapter. However, Cloud isn't the only Final Fantasy character to make an appearance in Astro Bot. Just like how Cloud can't go anywhere in the remake trilogy without Sephiroth poking his head in and harassing him, the same is apparently true for Astro Bot, as he also pops up at the end of the Mega Mix Mastery Challenge. Sephiroth is also a former member of Soldier, but unlike Cloud, he didn't go off and become an accessory to eco-terrorism. Instead, we're introduced to Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII via a trail of blood, a murdered Shinra president, and a flashback from Cloud, who reveals that Sephiroth went crazy during a mission and disappeared. While he has been presumed dead, he now appears to be roaming the world in search of something, causing despair wherever he goes. In talking openly about Sephiroth, I will likely have to spoil a few key plot points of Final Fantasy VII and subsequently its remakes, so if you don't want to be spoiled on a game from 1997, please skip ahead to this timestamp. Sephiroth appears in Astro Bot as the One-Winged Nemesis, so called because of his musical theme used for the final boss fight called One-Winged Angel. The name derives from the form he takes on in this boss fight, appearing as a false angel with one arm transformed into a wing. Since this appearance, Sephiroth has also appeared elsewhere with a single black wing on his back, although this form never appeared in the original Final Fantasy VII. The Nemesis part of his name derives from him being Cloud's nemesis. The two of them are both former Soldier members who've been exposed to extreme amounts of Mako energy and infused with DNA from an alien creature known as Genova, who Sephiroth views as his mother. This causes the two to share a psychic bond at various points in the story, despite wildly different goals. Also, this causes both of them to have unnaturally green eyes, which both bots reference by having green eyes instead of the standard blue. Cloud also particularly hates Sephiroth because in the incident where he went crazy, Sephiroth learnt of his origin as a science experiment and decided the appropriate response was to burn down the entire town of Nibelheim. A shot of him standing amidst the flames has become the most iconic image of him, and it's the inspiration for Sephiroth's basic pose in Astro Bot. His gadget item is the Masamune Blade, a fearsome weapon that few can wield, and Sephiroth's mastery of the weapon is indicative of his power. The description mentions a wing and a prayer, which is almost certainly another reference to his one-winged angel form, and a wing and a prayer is just a casual turn of phrase to fit it in. Sephiroth doesn't really have any connection to Oh no. So, not content with burning down Cloud's hometown, he also straight up kills a party member in Final Fantasy VII. Aerith is a character geared heavily towards magic and healing, and she is also the last surviving Cetra, which leads her to pray at an ancient city as a way to help protect the planet. But this leads to her being killed by Sephiroth in the middle of her prayer. I may be reaching. That reference to prayer is a reference to this specifically, but I can't help but make that connection. Like Cloud, Sephiroth in Astro Bot has a complex hit animation. He will perform a sequence of attacks against Astro with each hit. The first three are all spells, as he casts a fire, ice, and lightning spell, which are all three common spell attacks seen in the Final Fantasy series. These spells have 3 degrees of power: Fire, Firea, Firaga, Blizzard, Blizzara, Blizzaga, and Thunder, Thundara, and Thundaga. The latter of all of these are used by Sephiroth in the final boss fight of Final Fantasy VII Remake, where the bot version almost certainly got his casting animation from. The final attack Sephiroth hits Astro with is Octaslash, a move that did not feature in the original Final Fantasy VII, but has become his signature move since the prequel game Crisis Core released for the PSP. It's shown up almost every time Sephiroth shows up in a game since, such as his appearance as the villain rep for Final Fantasy VII in Dissidia, or as part of that same final boss fight in Remake. One final note. When Astro is hit by either Omnislash or Octaslash, he gets dazed with some cartoony birds flying around his head. These birds are also a reference. In Final Fantasy II, the series saw the first appearance of large ostrich-like creatures known as chocobos. These big yellow birds could be used as a mount, allowing you to traverse the world map without being attacked by monsters. They have appeared in every mainline entry ever since, including Final Fantasy VII. In this game, they are introduced after Cloud and his party have left Midgar and must catch a chocobo to allow them to cross a marsh that houses a deadly serpent. Final Fantasy continues to be Square Enix's flagship franchise, and since Final Fantasy VII, it's had an extensive history with PlayStation. Almost every mainline entry has had some degree of console exclusivity on Sony systems, with 13 and 15 being exceptions. Final Fantasy VII's popularity has also led to a ton of spin-off media, including a movie sequel, plus the prequel and remakes I mentioned in this section already, plus a game called Dirge of Cerberus where you played as one of the party members on his own in an action game. It was very strange. The third part of the remake trilogy is currently in development, and Final Fantasy XVII is almost certainly set to follow. Final Fantasy VII is available to play on PS5, as are all mainline Final Fantasy games in some form, except 11 and 13. The first two parts of the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy, Remake and Rebirth, are also both available, along with the remake of Crisis Core. In the 80s and 90s, there were two main publishers dominating the JRPG market. Square, as we've discussed, had the Final Fantasy series, but there was also Enix and their phenomenally popular Dragon Quest series. Today, they are a single entity, having merged in 2003, but a different merger between these companies occurred as early as 1992, when Final Fantasy creator Hironobu Sakaguchi joined forces with Dragon Quest creator Yuji Horii and iconic manga artist Akira Toriyama with the vision of producing an RPG together. Realizing the potential of this, Square loaned Horii from Enix and gathered a team of around 50 developers to develop what they saw as the dream collaboration. The end result was Chrono Trigger, released for the SNES in 1995, a game that spanned multiple time periods and saw its party battling threats across history. It proved to be a massive critical and commercial success, and to this day is still considered to be one of the greatest games of all time. I wouldn't know, as it never released in Europe until its DS remake. A year after Chrono Trigger, the game's writer Masato Kato would express frustration at the game's story, believing it to have unfinished business, and so he set out to make a game to address this. This would become a text adventure known as Radical Dreamers, released for the Satellaview expansion to the Super Famicom. This introduced a new cast, a trio of thieves collectively known as the Radical Dreamers. Due to the limits of the Satellaview, the game was restricted to Japan and eventually was removed from existence entirely. Kato was not done though. He wanted to explore many of the ideas in Radical Dreamers further in a sequel to Chrono Trigger. His wish was granted, and Chrono Cross would eventually release for the PS1 in 1999. Conveniently, it released around the same time Japan got a port of Chrono Trigger for Sony system, giving players the chance to play both together. Chrono Cross is not a direct sequel, however. It takes place in a similar world and features similar themes, but brings in a new cast and a new story. Well, I say a new cast, as the main character Surge was a member of the titular thieves in Radical Dreamers, and another member, Kid, would also feature prominently in Chrono Cross. An additional 43 characters were recruitable throughout the course of the game, each with their own unique methods of obtaining them. Chrono Cross replaced the time travel aspects of Chrono Trigger with the theme of parallel worlds. You play as Surge as he wakes up in his home village, agrees to meet his childhood friend Lena at the beach, only to pass out and find himself in a version of his world where he died as a child and no one in the village recognizes him. A typical turn-based RPG of the time, Chrono Cross featured a combo system where you could build up a set of attacks with varying levels of power and accuracy. Its magic system was built around the Elements system, where abilities could be equipped and needed to be charged up for use through good use of physical attacks. Color-coding attacks with field effects allowed attacks to be stronger. Chrono Cross also eventually gained representation in Astro Bot, as Surge appears as the Radical Dreamer. His name, obviously, is taken from the name of the Thieves group and the spin-off game named for them. His description is a reference to the name of Chrono Cross. His gacha item is the Memorial Stone, which is the gravestone where Surge discovers his own alternate world death. The Astro Bot version even features a similar inscription to the original, although Surge's bot version has a more obvious existential crisis over this. The description of the stone is a reference to the parallel world, which is referred to as another world throughout the game. In order to move between worlds in Chrono Cross, Surge passes through a portal that forms a dark circle underneath him before he drops through it. This is recreated when he is hit in Astro Bot. While Chrono Cross wasn't quite as well received as its predecessor, it's less to do with the quality of the game and more to do with just how much it had to live up to. That said, it did receive a generally positive reception and sold pretty well. While it's not regarded as breathlessly as Chrono Trigger, it does still have a solid reputation and stands among Square's vast library of beloved PS1 RPGs. A third Chrono game, Chrono Break, was considered but never saw the light of day. Chrono Cross is available to play on the PS5 via the Radical Dreamers Edition remaster, which also includes the text adventure of the same name, finally bringing it back into existence. Chrono Trigger, however, is not available. In the early 2000s, two developers at Cavia came up with a new concept that they wanted to explore. Takamasa Shiba and Takuya Iwasaki conceived of an aerial battle game similar to Ace Combat, but featuring dragons instead of fighter jets. The success of Dynasty Warriors led them to add a similar ground battle mechanic, and their new game entered development. Problem was, while Iwasaki was meant to be the director, he was too busy with other duties as a producer, so a new employee named Yoko Taro was brought on board to assume directorial duties. Drakengard released in 2003 for the PS2. It was set in a medieval world where an exiled prince fights to get revenge on the empire that ousted him. After making a pact with a dragon named Angelus, he set out to protect a series of magic seals from destruction. Drakengard received a mixed response, with the gameplay being derided as repetitive and the graphics viewed as dated. The story, however, was a high point for many, being compared to the anime Neon Genesis Evangelion. The game also came with multiple endings, including a bizarre fifth joke ending conceived by Yoko, where our hero and his dragon get warped to modern-day Tokyo, defeat a giant woman in a rhythm game, and get shot down by fighter jets. Man, what a wacky ending that is. I'm sure this will never be relevant. Anyway, Yoko Taro wasn't particularly pleased at being the lead on Drakengard, so his role on the game's sequel was reduced to video editor. Instead, he pushed for a new concept. His new game, NieR, was a more straightforward action RPG set in a post-apocalyptic world where the titular protagonist seeks to find a cure for the disease affecting his daughter or his sister, depending on which country you played the game in. During his search, he teams up with a talking book named Vice, a sweary swordswoman named Kaine, and a cursed boy named Emil. Oh, and it turns out the apocalypse in this game was caused by a disease known as White Coronation Syndrome, which spread when a giant monster woman warped in from some medieval fantasy world, along with a guy and a dragon. Hang on a minute, NieR was not a smash hit. Sales were minimal and reviews were mixed. This was bad for the studio, as Cavia would be closed down shortly afterwards. The Drakengard and NieR properties were transferred over to the publisher of the games, Square Enix. However, over time, NieR gained a cult classic status due to its solid storytelling, and Yoko Taro was eager to make a sequel. With the original studio gone, developer Platinum Games were contracted to help develop the game, with their track record in producing excellent action games being a key factor. And so, in 2017, the sequel, NieR Automata, released for PS4. It was another action RPG blending open-world exploration, hack-and-slash combat, and side-scrolling shmup action into one game. None of the original cast appeared, and instead this was set even further into the future, where Earth is in an even more dire state. Alien machines have invaded, humans have evacuated to the moon, and the only way to reclaim the planet is for military androids to wipe out the machines and restore peace. You play as one of these androids, Yorha No. 2 Type B, or 2B to her friends, along with a support named 9S. As you take your role in the intergalactic war, it soon becomes clear that something very strange is going on with the machines. NieR Automata was a huge success, and as such 2B is one of the new Square Enix bots added to Astro Bot in the latest update. She is the machine hunter due to her assigned function of fighting the alien machines. Her real name is also referenced in her description, in a nod to a famous William Shakespeare quote, which I assume is about how much he loved sexy android women. Please don't correct me on this one. 2B is accompanied by her gacha item, the Support Pod. All androids in NieR Automata are accompanied by support pods which provide long-range fire support and act as a conduit for communications with command in space. 2B's pod is Pod 042, who will frequently issue reports to her throughout the game in a serious mechanical way. He will often make suggestions by opening his sentences with words like proposal. He can also be petted, which triggers the following line.
Proposal. Continue to provide care for this pod.
And this was lifted wholesale for his item description in Astro Bot. 2B can be found fishing in the crash site, a reference to how you can fish in NieR Automata. Just like the original game, she sits on a generated stand that sticks out from her skirt, while her pod does the actual fishing. However, while in Astro Bot he has a fishing rod, he is the lure in NieR Automata. The pod in Astro Bot will fail to catch anything unless you hit 2B, at which point a random item will be pulled up from the pond. Several of these items are things you can fish up in NieR Automata. The fish, obviously, but also the tyre and battery are also items you can fish out and sell to vendors. Also, this orb with eyes can be fished up in the original game, but it's so rare I don't have footage of it. However, this orb is something special, as it's the head of a machine life form. These are the standard enemies for much of Automata, and while they come in a variety of body shapes, they all feature this orb-like head with 2 eyes. However, sometimes the orb is not a machine head and features a more detailed face with a creepy skeletal smile. This is Emil. Yes, the cursed boy I mentioned earlier from the original NieR. Spoilers for the original NieR incoming. Emil is a boy cursed with the ability to turn anyone to stone with his eyes. During Act 2 of the game, he reveals that this is due to him being created as a weapon along with his twin sister. His sister, as part of the process to become a weapon, is turned into a monstrous skeletal being that NieR and co end up fighting. At the end of the boss fight, Emil fuses with this being to take on a new form, a frail skeletal form with a strange orb skull. In one of the game's endings, this skull is all that's left of Emil, although he does remain alive. In fact, he remains alive so long that he turns up in Automata. Initially found inside a machine, he soon fuses himself into a shopping cart and drives around, offering wares to anyone who is able to stop him. He is a recurring merchant that 2B can buy items from this point on. Even after all this time though, he still has the mind of a child. Also, this orb-like skull can be seen in our world, as series director Yoko Taro wears it in every public appearance due to his personal disdain for being photographed. Honestly, same. There are a couple more items you can fish up that aren't things you can fish up in Automata, but are still relevant. For instance, you can get nuts and bolts. The nuts in this case may be organic, but the pun is clear. This seems to be a reference to item pickups in NieR Automata, which appear as holographic nuts and bolts that litter the ground. The mechanical kind in this case, obviously. Finally, you can fish up an ominous looking black cube with gold patterns on it. This is the black box, the central memory core of every Yorha android. We first see these in NieR Automata's prologue, where 9S uploads their memories to command, before he and 2B bring their respective black boxes in contact with one another. This creates a chain reaction that detonates the boxes, causing a large explosion. The memories uploaded to command allow them to reprint their consciousness into new bodies so they can proceed on further missions. NieR Automata was a huge success, with the game having sold around 9 million copies. As a result, Square Enix view NieR as a major franchise, with merchandise, an anime adaptation and countless crossovers all emerging off the back of its success. 2B has become an iconic character, making appearances in Soul Calibur, Final Fantasy XIV, and even Gravity Rush. Automata's success led to a remake of NieR, released as NieR Replicant version 1.2247448739, which also led to a greater appreciation of the original game. Drakengard, however, remains unavailable. The success of Ghost of Tsushima inevitably led to the development of a sequel. However, surprisingly, the sequel does not continue Jin's story. Instead, Ghost of Yotei takes place 3 centuries later in a completely different region of Japan, and features a new protagonist with their own story. Set in Ezo, now known as Hokkaido, Ghost of Yotei stars Atsu, a woman who vows revenge on a group known as the Yotei Six, who killed her family and stabbed her to a tree as a child. The game follows a similar formula to the first. It's an open world game where you must use every tactic at your disposal to take out your enemies. Also, much like the first game, Atsu made an appearance in Astro Bot. However, unlike Jin, her bot appeared before her actual game. At the time of writing, covering the Ghost of Yotei representation in Astro Bot is going to be tricky, as all I have to work with is 2 trailers and a 20-minute gameplay presentation. Some of this is subject to change based on what's in the final game, but right now, everything I can cover comes from these trailers. Atsu's bot name is Ezo Onryo, and Onryo is a vengeful ghost in Japanese mythology, continuing the first game's habit of calling its protagonists the Ghost, although it also makes clear that her goal is less noble than Jin's. She's purely out for vengeance. Ezo is the setting of Ghost of Yotei, the former name of the region now known as Hokkaido. Her description also references her mask, which is similar to the one Jin wore in his game and is visible on her character model. Her gacha item is a shamisen, which Atsu can play at campfires in Ghost of Yotei. She is seen playing this in the crash site and appears to be playing a variation on the game's main theme. The description for it asks, why slash when you can shred? A joke about how Ghost of Yotei features a lot of sword combat, and shredding is a term for rocking out on a guitar. And while a shamisen is not a guitar, it is a similar kind of stringed instrument. She is accompanied by a wolf, who joins her on her journey in Ghost of Yotei, although its origins are mysterious. It helps out in battle and seemingly acts as a scout for Atsu. While it's unclear at the moment, I do hope that you can do the same cool tricks the bot can do with her wolf in the final game. During that cool trick, leaves scatter everywhere, and these are distinctive. They are leaves of the ginkgo tree, found in East Asian countries and praised for its resilience and prominent yellow coloration in autumn. This tree is the kind that Atsu was stabbed to in her backstory, and the leaves appear to have a prominent significance to her as a result. This is likely down to the resilience, as Atsu herself is clearly resilient too. To show how important these leaves are, one of them even shows up in the game's logo. Ghost of Yotei has yet to prove itself. At the time of production, it has yet to be released, although it's unlikely to be a failure due to the popularity of the first game. And that is all of the Square Enix editions, and also Ghost of Yotei. Hopefully that is officially every bot covered across the entire game, until there's like some anniversary level or something that just throws even more characters in. Wouldn't surprise me at this point. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, whether you're happy with these character choices, or if you would have loved to see some other Square Enix characters instead. I certainly know that I would have liked to have seen some Parasite Eve. If you haven't seen the original batch of videos that this is part of, please go check them out. There's a link in the description. And while you're there, like and subscribe, all that stuff, and if you can, I would really appreciate some support over on Patreon. And with that, we're done, for now at least. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.